Hello, listeners. Welcome to yet another episode of the Startup Catalyst. A special guest for me, someone not based in India, yet he is very keen to contribute towards the success of the incubators in the GRG Gen Next incubator ecosystem. Michael Londgren is CMO for an extremely amazing startup called Responsive. The startup is not unfamiliar for us because we had the CEO visiting our incubator and having a personal one-on-one with me in one of the offline events we had. And just to brief you, Michael, we set up this group called Coimbatore Founders Circle, where every month we invite one entrepreneur who has made it big and who belongs to Coimbatore. And so it was extremely nice for us to have Ganesh come over and had that one-on-one discussion. In fact, it remains one of the most popular events we conducted because we had a huge PR blast after that. And Jesse was totally overwhelmed with the amount of coverage we were able to cover through that. So I hope you would have remembered that as well. I'll let Michael make the formal introduction. Welcome, Michael.
Ital, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be here with you and your listeners. So Michael Londgren, Chief Marketing Officer at Responsive. I've been with the company now for 2 years. Was really excited to join Ganesh and the rest of the team, and have been to Coimbatore now twice. And on both trips, have had the opportunity to meet with a number of entrepreneurs, which has been really fun. But the being a part of a emerging SaaS company that's trying to create a new category and become the breakout category leader, provide our offering to companies like Microsoft, Google, SAP, and others. It's just been really incredible. And so it's been a super fun journey, and excited to be here with you today and have a conversation.
Great, fantastic. So, Michael, I think the unique perspective that you bring is obviously the market knowledge, and as you know, the startup ecosystem remains very vibrant. You ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different opinions about where the startup ecosystem stands today. Then you ask them to slice and dice between US and India, you would probably have another 10 different perspectives as well. But what's Michael's take on the startup ecosystem? How does the market stand right now? If you want to just call out some major trends that you have observed and you're confident, which could be deep insight for not just the incubatees, but for the startup entrepreneurs who are listening to this podcast in general.
Well, one thing I'll say in terms of the startup ecosystem, I was actually amazed at the amount of entrepreneurship that I saw when I was in India, and it ranged from everywhere from like individual, fruit stands along different highways to small mom and pop shops to emerging SaaS companies to very large organizations. And so the entrepreneurship across India is incredibly vibrant and just such an important part of the overall economy, and just was so clear to me when I visited. I think in terms of emerging trends within kind of the startup community, and particularly as it relates to SaaS, I think one of the most exciting trends is what we're seeing happening with AI. AI is getting a lot of press these days, but can help fundamentally transform the way organizations are able to pull together information, leverage that information, automate different workflows, particularly with the growing awareness of generative AI capabilities. The public as a whole is becoming more attuned to what's possible. And so, for us at Responsive, AI has always been part of our solution, part of our story, key part of our differentiation. So it's fun to talk about that, but just in general, AI is one of the biggest trends. I think the second major trend is that it is easier today than ever to start a company. There are so many, entrepreneurs have access to amazing, tools online, computing power online, business applications that they can leverage to start their organizations, and then they can get incredible insights into your target customers, and do research, basically, from their desktop. It's important to obviously augment that through interviews and direct customer interactions, but the speed with which an entrepreneur can move today is incredible, and that's due to the tools that are available in part. The third thing that trend that I am seeing is more and more fractional roles emerging where startups don't necessarily have the ability to pay for a full-time individual in a given role, but on a fractional basis, they can secure amazing talent and which makes it much more affordable, allows the startup to move a lot faster. So I'm seeing AI, I'm seeing, it's easier than ever to get started, and then the ability to hire folks on a fractional basis that are really changing the overall startup landscape and the speed with which organizations can move.
Yeah, yeah. No, interesting that you mentioned about AI, and of course, from a usage perspective, it's no-brainer. I think almost any and every startup has to have some element of AI in there. But the question which is being raised more often than not, and especially, I mean, from the media that I get here in India, is the monetization capabilities, right? I mean, the number of companies, who have raised money based on AI goes into like tens of billions of dollars, but
Right.
the monetization is less than millions of dollars, right? So where is that disconnect, right? I mean, why is it that there is so much doubt about being able to make money using AI?
Hadal, it's a great question. AI in and of itself doesn't necessarily deliver the value. It's the tie into the business application where the value is getting delivered. And so I think you're right that there are a lot of companies that are getting funding and having pretty incredible valuations that are going to be extremely difficult to grow into. And so there's this concept that um, many in your audience may be familiar with, called the hype cycle. And I would say with AI, we're at the top of the hype cycle. And so a lot of energy, a lot of excitement around what's possible. But the things will start to settle down, and we'll start to see a greater, more of like a rational perspective on what's possible. And so I think so the super high valuations are going to start to come down a bit. In the end of the day, what really comes down to driving value and driving an ability to monetize is based upon actually solving real business issues in a
Yeah,
meaningful, predictable, repeatable way. And so we see, for example, with our own business, the idea of generative AI being able to create a response based upon, pulling from multiple resources and generate the response sounds interesting on the surface. The practical reality is the quality of the response is highly dependent upon the quality of the content that
right.
it's initially pulled from. And then there's also a lot more to say an RFP response than just the content itself. There's the workflow associated with it. There's the approvals, the project management, the syndication of questions out into an enterprise and getting them back, for a response. And so that gets into actually solving the business challenge. And so that's what's really critical. So AI can be helpful. It's
Yeah,
definitely an accelerant, but AI by itself isn't the answer. It's the
right.
delivery of value with a solution.
Hmm. So it's interesting that you mentioned that AI by itself, not so much, but AI as an enabler is probably maybe let's say it's a bottom line improvement tool for many companies to be able to get a faster processing, reduce their transaction cost or reduce their transformation cost, if I may call it. The other element which was coming to my mind as you were speaking is we've seen Google and search, we've seen Amazon and e-commerce, right? And then we have seen Facebook and social media. The first and the third have remained free. I mean, we don't pay for search today. We don't pay. I mean, me as a consumer, I don't pay. Amazon, on the other hand, has probably been extremely smart in building that e-commerce culture into us. And we end up paying premium for, I won't call it premium, but the discounts are gone. There's no deal on offer. Returns are not as no questions as it used to be in the beginning. So
Right.
now it's very clear where Amazon is making money from me, whereas Google and Facebook are not, right? Now, is AI also a technology in similar ways where I don't realize that I'm not paying for it, but maybe I am?
Well, I think that AI, I mean, it's AI is being used all over, and like all sorts of day-to-day apps, including Amazon, right? In terms of what gets served up,
Yeah,
Uber, in terms of, getting a ride, et cetera.
that's
So
right.
I think um, in the case of Amazon, I think they really focus on driving buyer behavior. And then once that buyer behavior has become entrenched, then some of the, extras kind of fade away into the background.
Yeah,
Um, are there things that we're benefiting from today that are AI related that we are not necessarily paying for, but ultimately will? I'm sure that's the case across a variety of different experiences.
yeah, yeah,
Um, Over time, as we know, like the economics have to work for the business. And so they may not monetize the AI capability directly, but they monetize the solution that they're selling or services that they're offering or monetizing the business in some other way,
yeah.
but presumably delivering more value because they're leveraging AI effectively.
Yeah.
Uh,
That makes sense. That's very interesting. Coming to marketing, since you're the guru in marketing, what's been the trends that you observed specifically from a marketing perspective? Maybe AI, not AI, but in general. I mean, if you had to call out four or five aspects in marketing that you have seen have changed, in your career.
I think a handful of things that I've seen change from a marketing perspective is, first of all, a more tuning of messaging. And
Okay.
so, whereas, a couple decades ago, all the messaging was pretty mass market. Now, messaging can be down to the individual level, and it is, and including like an experience on Amazon, that's really tuned to the individual buyer at the time of their search and kind of given search history and everything else. And so that's one major change. I think a second major change is the number of channels with which an organization like a company needs to be able to market has grown tremendously. And so, it's standard stuff like search and email, but also web presence plus social plus different events. A third is, I think, as a company, we're almost like mini broadcasters. And so, from a marketing perspective, um, at least in our case, we're hosting virtual events, we're hosting webinars, we're doing meetups, but we're doing a whole bunch of promotion via social. But there's a lot of focus on who is our target audience, how do we want to reach them and through what channels, what's our message, how do we broadcast it out, how do we engage with customers, how do we instrument the interaction so that we understand what's resonating versus what's not, and kind of tune that experience. A fourth thing I would say is a greater focus on end-to-end customer journey. So all the way from awareness to interest to consideration to purchase and then post purchase and advocacy, like really thinking through that end-to-end customer journey and trying to provide a compelling journey, um, both from a B2B perspective and from a B2C perspective. Apple has done extremely well thinking through the customer journey, all the way through like the opening of the package. All of that's tied into the brand experience. And so I think we're all becoming um, just much more sensitized to what a good customer experience looks like, and our expectations have grown accordingly.
Yeah. No, that's a very interesting point that you observed. Switching to more like India versus US, right? I think what are the aspects that you observed of a startup in the US, which you think India is yet to pick up, or vice versa? I mean, something which you find interesting in the Indian startup ecosystem, which you don't observe that often out there in the US.
So I'm in Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
and Silicon Valley is known for having a number of venture capital firms and for really pouring quite a bit of money into startups. And those startups operate at oftentimes at pretty significant losses while they're trying to figure out product market fit, and then in the early days of getting the business up and running. And those losses can extend for years. And so you hear about Series A, B, C, D, just raising more capital. And so the access to capital, at least historically, has been pretty readily available.
Right.
If I contrast that with, some of the entrepreneurship or a lot of the entrepreneurship that I've seen in India thus far, it's a much more measured approach and a, very thoughtful um, um, journey
Mhm.
around identifying a problem, addressing the problem, monetizing the solution, and then actually starting to fund company growth based upon customer revenue versus
Yeah.
going to the capital markets and funding a bunch of losses. And so it's um it's a much more measured and in my way, structured and appealing approach to grow a business and a very thoughtful, funding, from customers versus raising VC money.
Yeah.
I think translates into um, at least a lot of startups that I've seen that have been uh, founded out of India having solid balance sheets. They may not be growing as quickly, but they're
Mhm.
also operating um, much closer to break even or sometimes even profitably much earlier than a lot of US counterparts. That's um, one of the biggest differences.
Okay, okay. That's very interesting. And I think from a landscape perspective, it's interesting that you mentioned that, from a funding perspective, you see these differences. What I have personally observed is that the fund flow or the availability of funds varies drastically based on the background of the individual, at least in India, right?
Sure.
If you're connected with the VC circle, or if you're connected with investors through friends of friends of friends, it's much easier to start a conversation going. And if you're not, then it's extremely difficult. I mean, the man in the street can't just bump into an angel or a VC. And even if he bumps in, the response is fairly cold to start with. So a
Right.
lot depends on who you are rather than what you're speaking. I don't
Yeah,
know if that's true in the US as well.
Hatal, I think that's a really good point. I think in the US, it may be easier to get a meeting with a VC with their kids straight out of college that can occasionally get meetings with VCs, but they're also that doesn't necessarily mean likelihood of yes. I mean, I've heard plenty of stories where an entrepreneur met with 25, 30 VCs and just kept getting no after no after no. And so it might be easier to get the conversation, but it still can be somewhat challenging to get the money. But you are right. I
Right.
mean, anywhere in the world, who you know and how you know them does matter and definitely
Yeah.
can play a role in making it easier to raise funding.
Right, right, right. Switching to mentorship, you had good experience mentoring startups, and what have been the conversations like? What were the experiences like? If you could like share some bit on that.
Yeah, I think with mentorship of startups, it's really kind of born out of my own sort of personal experiences. I actually uh, started mentoring after running the business operations of the Stanford Daily. So it's one of the very few independent university newspapers in the U.S. So completely separate from the university. And so I ran that and then became a board member for a number of years and like
Wow.
started mentoring emerging leaders through that. And then that carried over into when I got into tech, bringing in folks onto my teams and providing mentorship there. As my career has evolved, I've started mentoring, different startups, and it's really helping think through things like, what's the total addressable market, who's your ideal customer profile, what's your core value proposition, what's your differentiation, how are you going to validate that, how are you going to, go ahead and nail before scaling. And so the experiences that I've had in a number of hypergrowth emerging companies um, has allowed me to, engage with a number of, entrepreneurs. And now I'm part of I think, uh, uh, an organization called Stage Two Capital, where we mentor early stage
Wow.
startups. And then I've had the opportunity actually in India to meet with a number of entrepreneurs, which has been incredibly fun. So.
Interesting, interesting. What are the initial points that you would advise to an entrepreneur on what are the things which are mandatory or important when you're starting up? Maybe a 3, 4 points which you think are very critical in the long run.
I think so. There are a handful of things. I think one of the things that I've talked about is developing a very simple play to win playbook early, which is and I learned this from Keith Kroc, who was the CEO and co-founder of Ariba, and then became the CEO at DocuSign. And we use this to scale a company, and then subsequently have leveraged it. I've leveraged it elsewhere, but basically, it's articulate vision, mission, team values, or company values, team rules, overall goals, strategy, and how you're going to execute. And so alignment to your
Yeah.
question and like what's important, like getting everyone
Yeah.
aligned around vision and
Mhm.
mission is incredibly important, like especially in a startup, but at companies of all sizes, you want the team rowing in the same direction.
Yeah.
The second thing is really focusing on delivering value customers are going to love. And so it's been very clear on who the customers are and what do they value, and such that they will become, truly becoming raving fans when sign up for your service, because that is, the voice of a raving fan carries much more weight than any marketing, right? It has a huge impact. We see that in the consumer world. When we're on Amazon, we see like a write-up of somebody that loved a product
Yeah.
that informs our decision. So focus on value that customers are going to love. And then the third is like, think about big moves and come up with a handful of big moves for, say, the next calendar year. And it could be, hey, we're going to test this product and make sure there's like really strong product market fit, or we're going to develop this way of telling our story, or we're going to frame our category in this way. But playbook, delivering value customers love, and then aligning on a handful of big moves for the year are really important. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second and final thing I'd add is the the other thing that's incredibly important is the team itself. And so bringing in amazing teammates, and it can be full-time hires, it can be fractional hires, it can be service providers, but the team, the company that wins is the one with the best team. And so having that team that can adapt, that can adjust to a changing environment, that can generate insights, that can really help tune an offering is incredibly important. And so really focusing on bringing in an amazing team makes all the difference.
Yeah. Now, it's very interesting that you mentioned about playbook and things like vision, mission, and goal, and then you emphasize on team because more often than not, the founders are so passionate about one product, one element which you didn't talk about, which is the product. Hey, I have this glasses. I'm just going to sell these glasses.
Yeah,
I don't care about who builds them. I don't care about how many glasses I sell. Sir, this is a great glass. You should have it. I mean, and they get hung up and they get stuck up. And then, of course, I remember that beautiful quote, right? I mean, an average product in hand of a great team can really make a big success. But a great product with an average team will go nowhere, right? I
yeah,
mean, they might kill that product, right?
yeah,
And I think, and a lot of people tend to deprioritize and saying, yeah, it's good, Michael. I will think about the vision, but let me just get started. Let me make a few sales. Let me just get some numbers on the board. Let me get some investors on the board. Then I'll think about team vision. I'll have a big company, and then people will come and say, okay, what's your vision? At that time, I'll tell my vision. I'm like, hold on, it'll be too late.
yeah.
So I think,
That's right. The other thing too, that's all. It's like, things like vision, mission, company values. They're not fixed in concrete. They can evolve. What's important
yeah,
is to articulate them and to have a shared perspective within the team.
yeah, yeah,
And then as you learn, adjust. But values, we've got a simple set of values, but they really make a difference. Like one
true.
is delight our customers.
Yeah,
One is see something, say something. We actually landed on the responsive name versus a different name when we rebranded our company because of
yeah,
that value. And so having values that team members actually buy into can make a big difference in a company's success. The product matters, don't get me
yeah,
wrong. That's why I was talking about value customers love, but it's value
yeah,
the customers love, not value we as entrepreneurs love. Like the
yeah.
customer has to value it, right? That's
That's
what
true. Yeah,
matters.
yeah. I think it comes from the background, right? So typically, if you're from a tech background, and especially if you've not had industry experience, right? You've not worked in a company before you start your startup. These whole things, mission and vision, are actually words in the dictionary for them,
Right,
right? They've never seen a vision and mission in on paper ever for any company.
right.
So it's so difficult for them to give that the priority when they're setting up their own firm, right?
Yeah,
They're like, yeah, when we were in the lab in my engineering in second year, we were discussing this, and we thought this is a great idea. We went back to the hostel, and we started, two of us got together and built up this idea, and we launched the product. That's it.
right,
Oh, I
right.
didn't have time to think about vision and mission and all that.
Right. And that's totally fair. But like in today's world of generative AI, it's pretty easy to like write a prompt
Oh
and
yeah,
get
that's
like
true.
ideas back and then to simplify it. I mean, it's pretty
Yeah,
easy.
it's
And
pretty easy, no
yeah.
doubt.
And so, but having something, it gets back to the point about alignment, like getting people kind of rowing in the same direction. So
Yeah, no, that's true. The other thing which is critical is, and I'm a great sucker for failures and mistakes, right? We all know that failures are a stepping stone to success, but it would be better not to make mistakes which someone tells us. So, two or three mistakes which you would want startup entrepreneurs to avoid.
two or three mistakes. The well, number one is hubris, like the belief that one as an entrepreneur knows more than the customer and doesn't like actually take a customer perspective and take that in mind. Now, I understand the saying, if you'd ask folks what they wanted from a transportation perspective, they'd say a faster horse rather than a car. Like I get that, but there is a balance. But I
Yeah,
think, the number one, and I have seen this where an entrepreneur basically um, ignores the signals from customers and from prospects, and then and continues down a path that isn't going to be viable because there's just not enough interest, or the solution isn't differentiated enough, or it's not compelling enough. So that's one mistake. Second mistake is hiring the wrong people. And that gets back to my point about the importance of a team. And so it's so incredibly important to bring in the right people. And if you can't afford a great person full time, then bring them in on a fractional basis, but get the right people in. Third mistake I've seen is teams keeping the wrong people on the team for too long. If somebody's not a good fit, it's not a good fit, across the board, and it's not going to get better. And so I think, being willing to make changes can be important, but it gets back to the importance of a team. But I think one mistake is hubris. The second is, not getting the right team in place. The third is not managing cash flow effectively, and so signing up for too big of a burn and
yeah,
then finding oneself in a position where they have to do layoffs, and then you can actually kick off a downward spiral when something
yeah,
like that happens. And so it's really important to be very thoughtful with financial resources
yeah,
and plan for there will be there are going to be some bumpy times, and so
yeah.
being ready for those is important.
Right. No, I think the very important point that you mentioned with regard to cash flow management, and again, I would like to cite the fact that a lot of entrepreneurs in India have never seen the kind of money which they get when they get funding, right? So they
Yeah,
are totally overwhelmed receiving $1 million in their bank. Their father's salary never exceeded $10,000
yeah,
ever. They never earn more than, let's say, $20,000. I'm giving you random numbers, but
yeah,
that's a chasm. That's a big difference between what they get for funding their startup versus what they have. So
right.
the management is big challenge, right? I mean, how do you manage, with a random analogy, how do you manage a wardrobe of 100 clothes when all you had were five clothes all through your childhood? And suddenly you're like, oh, what do I do, right? Should I wear a different cloth every day? Or should I let 80 of those clothes just lie in the wardrobe? They're just there for security. I don't have to wear them every day. And you can just put that analogy into cash flow management for your startup, and then you see the challenge that comes in. The interesting part you mentioned about people, I think it's not just about hiring. a lot has got to do about firing. And, I don't mind sharing that on a public podcast like this, but, we all make mistakes in
Yeah.
hiring, and we all rush up our hiring many times simply because, there's too much pressure from the team to deliver. And, invariably you need people to deliver, right? I mean, regardless of how much AI integrated your solution is, you still need people at the end of the day. And
Yeah.
you make decisions more on gut rather than everything on paper, because in a 45-minute or a 1 hour or even a 2 hour interview, you really can't be sure of the person really working out for that particular role in that particular situation all the time, right? You're likely to make mistakes. So I think, but doing that with a more humane mind, being very kind and understanding that, you're literally creating a life quake in the mind of the individual, in the life of the individual by,
Right.
asking him to let go. I think that's very important, right? I mean, people do understand that, I hired you because I liked you. I don't want you because I don't like you. I mean, it's as simple as that. But
Right.
to make it more like a humane transaction rather than being very mechanical, which I think some of the companies in Valley very close to you have done that, right? So I think that's very important.
Yeah, there's a book called The $1 Trillion Coach
Oh,
where,
yeah,
yeah, and one of the key points in the book is, um, handling transitions in a very, very thoughtful way. And there may be somebody that was on the team that was a great fit at a certain stage of the company, but isn't quite the great fit anymore.
yeah,
And so navigating through that very thoughtfully, I think is really important. Um, the second thing though too, it's like, yeah, there can be questions of skill set or whether or not, you know, someone's scaling effectively. There's also the way in which they're engaging with others. And to me,
yeah,
if someone's not engaging in a productive way, then that actually needs to be addressed right away because that
yeah,
can be that can create a whole bunch of issues within an organization. It's so important that people are able to work together really effectively.
yeah,
And so that kind of transition's a little bit easier to see and drive, and people are more likely to understand that importance. But you're right. I think the very thoughtful, you know, discussion around a transition while also giving someone an opportunity to try to address, deficiency is important. So in my mind, ideally, someone's never surprised, if it's time to make a transition, but I know that's not always the case.
yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting you mentioned $1 Trillion Coach, because I'm a certified life coach, and a lot of people ask me what made me go into coaching, and that's that.
Yeah,
The story
yeah,
of Bill Campbell was so impactful. I was like, I mean, I read it way back in 2018, but
yeah,
the lessons from that still remain with me. How impactful you can actually be, even if you're not from that domain or the industry.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just that book is just packed full of wisdom, and so that book really resonated with me as well.
Yeah, yeah. So that brings me to the next question. I mean, a few books which you would want to recommend. I know there are a lot of them behind you, right? But what do you think would be interesting read for an entrepreneur?
Most of my books now are digital, and so I listen to them, but I do still have some
Yeah,
on the bookshelf. But so $1 Trillion Coach is one of them. I think others are Play Bigger. And so Play Bigger is all about shaping one's category and then driving to breakout category leadership and the way to go about that. And so
okay.
I think it's a really good perspective for an entrepreneur that's pursuing a category of any size. But it's just like be very, very clear on where you're competing, what your category is, and how to, and then work to shape it to your advantage. I like so that's Al Ramadan. So Play Bigger. Another book that I really like is Simon Sinek's.
Oh
Start
yeah,
with Why.
start with
Um,
why.
that's a classic.
Yeah.
Another one, and I'm sure this will resonate with you. So Mindset by
Oh
Carol Dweck.
yes, Carol Dweck.
Yeah, phenomenal book.
Yeah,
And so, like, I really gravitate toward folks that have like growth mindset, and
yeah,
I think it's a really important perspective. And in fact, I think one of the success factors for entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial leaders is like just a thirst for knowledge and a thirst for continuous improvement and growth.
yeah,
And so she really touches on that. I like John Deere's Measure What Matters. And so like
yes,
leveraging OKRs.
Yes.
objectives and key results. Even in a small company, like having like a simple set of OKRs, I think can be really helpful. Um, I also like Atomic Habits, and
Oh,
it's really
yes.
about building up those
Yeah.
habits on a day-to-day basis that over
Yeah.
time really make a big difference. So
Right.
those are some on my list.
Wow. Fabulous, fabulous collection of books, and I can resonate with most of them. Brings me to the next question. Nowadays there's a lot of talk about mindfulness, paying attention, not letting your mind impact you, and so on and so forth. What's your own mantra for mindfulness, and how do you keep yourself a cool mind despite all the clutter and clamor going around you?
It's not easy, so I'll acknowledge that, especially when there are all the communication channels we as leaders and entrepreneurs have, email, Slack, text, voicemail, everything else. What I do is I do try to, constrain generally work hours, to, from early morning down, to early evening. And then I, start my days with a workout. And then on weekends, I'm doing things that are usually non-work related. And so, a lot of hiking, a lot of cycling, swimming, backpacking, physical activity and seeing friends and family. But I think, taking a step back and kind of recharging is important. That's so important to being successful is
Yeah.
recharging. Another book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective
Oh,
People.
yeah.
Stephen Covey, he talks about
Stephen Covey.
sharpening the
Yeah.
saw. So
Yeah.
sharpening the saw, it's like it's that recharge. And so I think it's important to try to separate, work um, from non-work
Yeah.
and finding times to recharge. I mean, obviously there's some crossing of boundaries, but um, it's important to give our minds a break.
Very interesting. One startup founder that you admire?
One startup founder that I mentored or
That
met,
you admire, that you maybe an idol or someone whom you look up at.
a startup founder that I admire. I mean, in the Valley, there are so many,
That's
but
why I
one
wanted to
that
say only one.
yeah. So one actually. So I mentioned Keith Crock earlier, and how he introduced us to the Play to Win playbook, and again, which is on YouTube videos and so on. But really admired him because he was the CEO and co-founder of Ariba, and then he became the CEO of DocuSign, and the energy and thoughtfulness and strategic vision that he brought to the company was amazing. We were one of 50 e-signature providers at DocuSign, and we broke out. I joined when we had a team of 180, and we're 30 million in AR. Over the next 6 years, we grew to 2,500 employees, 500 million in ARR, and then we went public. So just incredible growth.
Yeah.
We were very thoughtful with Keith's leadership on aligning to a play to win playbook, shaping our category, um, enabling our sales teams, really putting in place the rails to scale, and like really building out our ecosystem.
Right.
DocuSign today is doing close to 3 billion in ARR. So to have
Fabulous.
been part of that at the $30 million,
Yeah.
period, and then building this global trust network under his leadership, it was just incredible to be to work with him, and I've taken a lot of those learnings and applied them to other situations.
Oh, oh. I'm glad that you shared a name from your personal journey rather than just saying, okay, Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, they're super interesting as well. But Steve
Of
Jobs, I
course.
worked at Apple early in my career,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, what you observed from close quarters always has a very special meaning and meaning attached to it for
yeah.
sure. The last part is where I flip the mic around. What's a question you have for me?
So I saw on your profile that you're an Ironman triathlete, and I
Yeah,
feel like there are great learnings from being an Ironman triathlete that are actually applicable
yeah,
to startups.
very
And
true.
as a triathlete myself, although only Olympic distance,
Okay,
I'd love to hear
you're
your
getting there.
perspective.
You're getting there.
I'd love to get your perspective on sort of like the learnings you've taken from your triathlon training and the applicability to startups.
No, very, very, very good question. And of course, while I talk a lot about Ironman independently, but I never realized there are learnings in the startup entrepreneurship perspective. I think the first one which comes to my mind is obviously resilience, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you really can't sit back and relax, right?
yeah,
When you're out on the field for 17 hours, morning to evening, doing three different activities,
right,
you just can't take a break and just chill and relax, right?
right,
So you can technically, if you're really fast, you can take a break in between. That's not a problem. But
right.
yeah, for most of the amateurs, they would not, right? They would rather like get to the finish line ASAP, right? And
Yeah.
and get. The second one is to be prepared for anything and everything, right? I mean, there are three
Mm-hmm.
different activities. You're getting to the water, you're getting on a bike, and then you're running. And I
Yeah,
used to keep telling all my fellow buddies before the Ironman I did in Kazakhstan in 2022. And I was like, apart from a bike malfunction and an injury, it's very unlikely any of us will not do it. We are all
mm-hmm.
trained. We have spent months together, and Indians are very conservative. So we spent a lot of money getting there.
Yeah,
Uh, we have set a lot of expectation for our family. We sacrificed our vacations. We told our family that, look, I'm traveling alone. It's too expensive for the whole family to travel. So there's a lot of mental pressure on us, right?
yeah,
Now compare this exactly with a startup story, right?
right.
You gave up a well-paying job. You had a great alma mater. You could have, been working for a Microsoft or a Infosys or a
Yeah,
Wipro and had a comfortable life. You don't have to like have that ambiguity or uncertainty hanging on top of your head all
yeah,
through every day, every week, every month. So similarly in Ironman, while you're practicing, you don't know whether you're going to actually achieve it, right?
yeah.
Something or the other comes up, your bike chain comes out and you're left stranded for in middle of nowhere because this is a 180-kilometer distance. It's not like I can go to the neighborhood store and ask him to do it, or I can jack up the stuff. And what if my chain breaks? I
Yeah,
can't fix the chain, right? Yes, if I have a flat tire, I might have a spare tube with me. Putting that tube back, do I still have time? And accidents, right? I mean, someone bumps into someone and you break your hand or you break your head. There's no way that you can continue and finish it, right? And
right.
you have to go back, right? They are like ruthless about cutoffs, right? If you're not there at the end before the deadline, you're not there. There's
Right,
no consolation prize that, oh, we feel sorry for you. Here is your medal.
right,
No, nothing like. So similarly, there is absolutely no mercy for a startup entrepreneur, right?
yeah,
If he
yes,
fails, he fails. Nobody's
yeah,
going to come, no, no, great job. This is a special
right,
award. Nobody gives a special award for a failed entrepreneur.
right,
Nobody looks at a failed Ironman. Nobody would give you any certificate, any medal.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, some of your close friends will, hey, no, no problem. Yeah, we do it next time. We can do it next. There's always a next time in startup as well.
right,
But will you go back? Will you take that challenge again? Will you train for 6 months again? Will you sacrifice your private time and your family time and your office time to do all that training all over again for another
yeah,
6 months? Probably not. You'd
right,
go back and say, no, no, Ironman is not the thing for me. I'll say, no, no, startups are not the thing for me, and
right,
go back to a regular job, which is a nine to
right,
six job and you're getting a paycheck. But
yeah,
will you get that high? Will you be able to get that high? Will you
right,
be able to get that feeling of wow in a
yeah,
job
yeah,
versus an entrepreneur versus a startup? You'll never. It's
yeah,
impossible, right? I mean, yeah, people talk about entrepreneurship. People talk about how Google encourages entrepreneurs. But hey,
mhm,
you do really good product. Do you think Google is going to let your name shine? No, they're going to absorb the product, or you want to leave the company and then start all over again
right,
without having that, cocoon of Google supporting you, which means you're
mhm,
going to be out in the field as well. So, there are certain things which entrepreneurship only gives you, right?
yeah,
A regular job does not. And so similarly for an Ironman or a triathlon, the experience which you gain, and of course, the number of Ironman events are growing up. The number of people who are doing an Ironman constantly is growing up. It's
yeah,
becoming far more popular, but still it remains something which more people say wow to rather than okay types, right? So it
right,
it retains that privilege as well. So I think, yeah, there are a lot of synergies and similarities. The variances of three events, you're going to a choppy water, there are big waves. And just
right,
yesterday I had a podcast with another friend. He did this Ironman in New Zealand, and the previous day, the day of training, it was completely flat. It was a lake, not even an ocean. Completely
mhm,
flat, placid, calm water. I mean, you're like, okay, I'm going to get a PB here. And the next day when he comes, he hears thunderous noise and like, what's going on? there were 5 feet, 6 feet waves on
Oh my,
that lake. There was 140 DNF on that day. It was that crazy a day to
God.
be actually swimming. And of course, the organizers are bound by it, right? So even if there are big waves, even if it's scary, even if it's life-threatening,
Right,
they will provision for saving lives if need be, but they can't stop the event from happening. So they have to
right.
let it happen. And you, if you have signed up, you come, travel all the way to New Zealand. You told your family, you probably your family is with you. They are witnessing you. You can't be chickening out
Right.
2 hours before the event and say, no, no, beta, no, no, son, that the waves are too big. The son
Yeah,
will think, what kind of a dad is, he's not, he's scared of waves.
yeah,
Forget it.
yeah,
So yeah, I think, and similarly in entrepreneurship, right? You can't share everything with your family, right? You have to just
yeah,
go out every day morning as if everything is normal. And, by the time you hit the office, there's, a ton of bricks fall on you
yeah,
and everything is chaotic. You don't know where the next check is going to come from. You don't know how you're going to pay the salaries. You
yeah,
don't know how to hire people because you don't have anything to pay them and so
yeah,
forth.
yeah.
Lot of learnings. Yeah.
That was great. I mean, I think that's a fantastic articulation of the parallels between the two. There definitely are parallels. So
Yeah. Yeah. So it
business
was
being
talk.
incredibly important.
Yeah, very true. Very true. No, I was saying fantastic talking to you, Michael, and more importantly, it's an extremely our pleasure and privilege to have you on board as a mentor. I'm sure the incubatees have a lot to learn from you, from the diverse experience that you have, the kind of amazing companies that you work for, the kind of situation that you've observed, and I'm sure it's going to be a very healthy and fruitful interaction going forward. And thanks a lot for being on this podcast and sharing your own journey and your vision. It's been very useful to us.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It was really, really fun. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.